Throughout all the various industries that there are in this world, they all have one thing in common, and that one thing is called the element of surprise. The same thing applies to chess. From the Alekhines defense, e4, knight f6, e5, followed by knight d5, c4, knight b6, and you know the rest. Till you get to knight c3 and black replies with pawn to d6, gambiting a pawn on the d5 square. This is known as the McInnes Gambit. And then there's the Caro-Kann. After the moves e4, c6, d4, and d5, white replies with bishop to e3, gambiting a pawn on e4. This is Mises' gambit. And one final example is springing from the bishop's opening, the Lewis counter gambit. And after c3, white replies pawn to d5, again known as the Lewis counter gambit. But the main feature of this video is a gambit starting from the Scandinavian defense. This line takes black into a queen sacrifice. This is good for players who want to practice their defensive skills and improve their defensive skills. After the common moves e4 and d5, knight to f3 gambits a pawn on e4, followed by knight g5, and if knight f6, then white continues with bishop to c4, attacking the pawn on f7. Black defends, and now there's more pressure on the e4 pawn. Castling, getting the king to safety. Black returns the pawn, and now there's the move pawn to f5.
Advancing the pawn to f5 favors black, you know.
After both sides take action in the center, getting their kings to safety, black continues fighting for central control. King to h8 moves the king out of the bishop's range, and pawn to e5 bolsters the pawn on f4. White grabs space on the queen's side, but retreating the bishop to a2 keeps the bishop on the long a2 to g8 diagonal. While c5 is a common move to grab space, white blows the center open with pawn to d4. However, white isn't done yet. Pawn to b4. Then we have capture and capture on d4. Notice how the rook on f8 defends the pawn on f4. That is a dangerous pawn. Black chooses an alternative, sacrificing the queen. And after bishop b2, either take the bishop on a2 or capture the rook. Capture, discovered check, and white wins the queen. The engine, however, favors black. And now let's continue. So black has two rooks, a bishop, a knight, and pawns versus white's queen and rook and pawns. So where is the counterattack? The counterattack is rook d4, double attacking the pawn on g4. Queen c7 check, king g8, and now rook e3. White is prepared to trade off his last rook. And now all white has to fight with is a queen. The pawn on b4 is very dangerous. Now, pawn to b3, the pawn is only 2 squares away from promotion. So my question to you is, do you think white will be able to stop the advance of the pawn to the promotion square? White finds the resourceful queen d6 double attacks the rook on f8 and the pawn on h6. Queen b3 is a must. This is the serious threat. Threatening to push the pawn, bishop f5, and white has to capture the pawn on b2. For the time being, black's knight has to stay on c6, and the king, rook, and bishop must be coordinated well. Black is on a tightrope defense. It's good that white takes a safety measure to get the king over to the queen side away from the rook. Queen d2 keeps an eye on the a5 pawn. Queen e3, eye on the pawn. And now queen e8. And black is able to cause white some problems. Very good practice for you would be to take note of these moves, write them down, play the video later, and write the moves down, and then you can practice these positions over your board. Finally, the knight moves and white gets the pawn on b7. Black has only one pawn left versus white's two pawns. Rook check, king b2, rook g6, queen b4, and the bishop is played to d7. And notice how the knight, rook, and the bishop covers the c6 square in order to stop white from pushing that pawn. And now let's come to a close. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned.